Hello, everyone, peers, professor, audience, Miss Baldera, and today we're gonna be talking about suicide and homicide. I cannot pronounce that homicidality. Excuse me. Um, so we're gonna talk about basically the definition of a suicide and homicide, as well as the interventions, assessments, and prevention. And this is for the trauma crisis and traumatic course with Dr. Rafaela Peter. And I tried to do a voiceover with my PowerPoint. It just hasn't been working for the past few days, so I'm hoping that this works fine. So I currently work in a crisis unit, so I firsthand get to see this on an everyday basis. And I see clients, roughly like 12 clients per day or something like that. And when I tell you that this happens more often than one thinks, and it ranges from male to female, and it ranges from youth to adulthood, and it's a real thing. And there are risk factors that take place, and we as counselors, we need to be familiar with those risk factors, as well as what suicide is and homicide is, ideations and all that stuff, how to prevent it. Okay. And the assessments that we have to get familiar with as well when discussing these topics. All right, so again, we just went over what we're going to be discussing in this presentation, which is just understanding the definition of suicidality and homicidality, the warning signs and the risk factors, suicide intervention and assessments. We're gonna discuss the trauma-informed crisis response, the ethical and responsibilities as counselors that we have, and the cultural considerations. Super important, because every client is unique and every case is unique. So we need to, as counselors, accommodate to such. And then we're also going to be sharing some resources as well. To start off and set the scene, I just want to play this couple minute video. So let me go ahead and do that.
Oh, wow. How you doing? You good? Oh, sorry, thank you. How you doing? God, it's exciting, isn't it? How's the week been? Okay. Yeah.
I really love this video. It's a suicide awareness video, and I really think it sends a powerful message, because it just goes to show that just because what you see on the outside doesn't necessarily mean that that person has suicidal ideations or homicidal ideations. It's more than just the outside or what the typical person perceives as such. There are different there's just, it can be broken down to several factors, and that's what we're going to be discussing today. So what is suicidality? And suicidality is basically suicide ideation, right? Thoughts of suicide, not wanting to wake up, or just simply committing the act of suicide, thinking about it. And that can range from thoughts to planning and intent. Okay. And when we think about suicidality, excuse me, we often think about, or we correlate it to things such as depression, hopelessness, etc. And this is a very, very deep subject, because it really it requires immediate attention, and us as counselors, we need to be equipped with the necessary information to ensure that we have the safety of our clients in mind. Oh my god, I don't even have it in full view. Let me go ahead and do that. All right, so what are the warning signs of suicide? So again, like we just discussed, hopelessness, distress. Some people withdraw from their friends, from work, their hobbies, interests. They'll report hopelessness. A lot of people talk about death. Some people just don't talk about death. They just completely isolate, and again withdraw, and they don't talk about it at all. Another typical or common sign is, or warning sign, is someone that uses substance use to cope, and that can mean any drugs or alcohol. Some of the risk factors for suicidality would be depression, trauma, like PTSD. So those diagnoses can definitely be a risk factor for suicide ideation. Previous suicide attempts is a big one. Definitely is something to look at. It's a pattern and it's a history of the person, so that definitely is a big risk factor. Access to lethal means, especially if the person has intent, if they have access to a weapon and they have a plan to carry out the ideation, that is a big risk factor. Some other risk factors are loss of a person and they're grieving, loss of a job or a relationship, financial problems, when people don't have support or someone to talk to, or a safe space or environment. One of the acronyms that we like to use is PAF-WARM. If you can see that there. And basically, PAF-WARM stands for ideation, substance abuse, purposelessness, excuse me, anxiety, trapped, hopelessness, withdrawal, anger, recklessness, and mood changes, which basically it helps us remember all of the risk factors as well as the warning signs for suicidality. Trauma, hopelessness, substance, and social isolation are strongly associated with increased suicide. Now, when we are going to assess for suicide. So specifically in the crisis unit that I work with, the most common assessment that we use is the CCRS, the Columbia assessment. And and then I have it up here too. So the Columbia Suicide Severity Assessment. So we use it to see if the person has ideation, if they're an immediate risk and they need to be admitted for crisis, the severity of it, and then also the behaviors behind it. Another acronym that we can remember this by is the SAFE-T model, which is identify risk factors, which we just spoke about, identify the protective factors, conduct suicide inquiry, determine risk level, and document and intervene. Some of the questions that are on the assessment itself is, and we have to ask them directly, have you ever thought about suicide, or have you ever wished that you would not wake up? We also assess for intent. We ask them, if so, have you thought about how you would carry this plan out? And also intent, have you carried or had made plans to carry out the plan? All right, so crisis intervention and safety planning is next. This is super important. Whether the crisis or the ideation or the suicidality is from minor to severe, it is super important that we take it very seriously regardless of the level, and we must always have a plan. So a safety plan is what we call it, and all clients should have one. It should be easily accessible for them. One of the typical questions that we ask is, if you had it on paper and you had a written safety plan, where's a safe place that you would keep it? Nowadays, I think having a safety plan on your notes or on your phone, specifically with the youth now, that'll be very helpful and easily accessible. But safety planning is extremely important. In safety planning specifically, we identify triggers, what triggers, what the person can use to cope, or who or where they find safety. And this can definitely help prevent, because it brings the client to be self-aware of their triggers, and they have somewhat of a list on how they can cope with when that situation arises. So definitely with safety planning, we do have to identify, like I said, warning signs, coping strategies, support contacts. Yes, so we always try to ask for a safety person or someone that's supportive that person can call, and that's super important for safety planning. Crisis resources and restrict lethal means, also a very big important. So in previously in the initial assessment of Columbia, we would ask if they had plans to carry out, and in the plan, if they had intent. And so the next step would be asking, do they have access to lethal weapons? And that could be a gun, that could be a knife, whatever the case is. And then we try to see if there's a way that if they have a mom or a dad or a safety person that could hold those things for them and keep it, away from the client. So the point is to restrict while they're in active crisis. And some intervention strategies that we use is active listening. Sometimes we do need to use, depending on the severity of it, the escalation. hospitalization if needed, so being Baker acted, and then involving the support system, having a safe person that they can tell what's going on it goes a long way. And us as counselors, we have a duty. We have many duties and ethical responsibilities. So we have the duty and ethical responsibility to protect our clients and their safety and their and confidentiality between us and our and confidentiality with our clients, excuse me. We definitely we're mandated reporters, so that is our responsibility. If there's a case that's very unique or you're unsure of, definitely seek supervision and consultation, and always refer back to your ACA code of ethics. Super important. Now, cultural considerations, super important. I keep saying super important. This is a very tough and real topic, and it happens every single day. Again, I see so many clients on a daily basis, so everything that I say it's important, but I'll keep reiterating. Cultural considerations is super important because, like I mentioned earlier, every patient or every client it's unique. So a lot of clients, their culture may not believe in therapy, their culture may not believe in depression or suicide, or they might deem that person as weak, or whatever the case is. We don't know what that person's thought process is, and therefore we should consider cultural considerations and just basically asking simple questions. So one of the questions that we ask is, does your culture or ethnicity impact your behavior or your decision making? And a lot of the times people will say no, and a lot of times people will say yes. Some people will say, well, today I had an example of a client, and he said, yeah, I'm white. A lot of people don't like white people, and so that changes up my decision making. And then this is your opportunity to get that person, ask questions. What is their definition of homicidality and suicidality, right? Because we all have different definitions. We have the textbook definitions, but for them it might be different because of their culture or how they were brought up or how they perceive things. So another acronym that we could use is SAMHSA, Trauma Informed, the 4 Rs. And that is realize, recognize, respond, resist, and re-traumatization. And this is often used with cultural considerations when assessing a patient or a client. Here are some resources that we can provide to our clients. So we have some national resources like the 988 Suicide and Crisis Lifeline, the Veterans Crisis Lifeline, and the SAMHSA National Helpline. And then here in specific, because I live in Florida, specifically for Florida, we got the Florida Mobile Response Team, very good support team here. Florida Abuse Hotline, the SMA Healthcare Crisis Services, and the NAMI Marion County. Now we're going to talk about homicidality. And this is super important too, and it's something that we must assess. So what is homicidality? Which is basically when a client has thoughts of harming another person. And again, just like suicidality, this can range from just having thoughts to actually having intent and carrying out the plan. And this, just like suicide, we have to assess, we have to recognize risk factors, and we have to put preventative measures in place, as well as a safety plan. So what are some warning signs? So warning signs are direct or indirect threats. The person they might say things about another person. And like I said, it could be indirect. They could say something like, I would really like to get back at this person. That's not necessarily a direct threat, but we do have to keep that in mind. It could be fixation on a specific person. The person can be escalated or even show patterns of paranoia towards another person, or even just ideation in their head. Some risk factors for homicidality are history of violence, okay, substance abuse, trauma exposures, access to firearms and weapons, mental illness, impulsivity, and emotional dysregulation. An acronym that we like to use here is HCR 20. So violence risk assessment. Just like we went over here, historical factors, clinical factors, risk management factors. All right, and so for assessment processes, just like suicidality, you have to recognize how severe it is. Is it just a thought? Have you been planning it? Have you made plans to carry out the intent? So these are things that we have to assess for and that we have to ask. We have to determine the history of the violence. How long has this pattern been going? How long have you had these thoughts? And then here are some examples of clinical questions. Do you have a plan? Do you have access to weapons? Have you thought about hurting someone? Do you have a specific target? And these are questions that you cannot be scared of asking. You have to ask them in a direct way. So some measures that we can take is de-escalation techniques, right? We need to learn how to de-escalate. This is a very tough subject, and we need to recognize that with those ideations come with possible threats or possible aggression, or the person may not be that way, but we definitely use de-escalation techniques. We have to maintain a calm tone and demeanor, and then remove access to weapons if possible, or restrict weapons. And again, this comes from assessing the client and asking those direct questions, and ensuring that you follow these protocols. Again, this is the SAMHSA 4R. So realize, recognize, respond, and resist re-traumatization. This is super important. Resist re-traumatization. And this comes from assessing and asking questions to the client. So if a client tells you, oh, it's very triggering for me to, I don't know, for you to touch me, right? And then I go and I tap him in the shoulders, then we're not following the guidelines. We need to ensure that we're listening carefully, that we're assessing, and that we are taking into consideration the risk factors, the triggers of the person. And just like suicidality, we have ethical and legal responsibilities. So first off, we have to have confidentiality with our clients. And we also have a duty to warn and protect. So when it comes to duty to warn and protect, if it's just thoughts or ideation, we may not have to include the person just yet. But if there's a mention of the person and there's a mention to carry out the plan to the person, they have means to lethal weapons, then we do have a duty to warn and protect. Definitely documentation is super critical, Because remember, most of this, just like suicidality, we need to look at the person's history and patterns over time. And this is very important when it comes to documentation of every crisis. It's very critical. And then here I just put the Tarasov and regions of the United States of California, which where's the original, where it originated and established the duty to warn and protect. Once again, with cultural considerations, we must take into consideration the cultural aspect of this, because culture influence the way the person thinks, perceives things, and then what's in the mind will also be acted in as their behavior. And then these are some resources for the homicidality, the crisis and violence prevention. So definitely call 911 in this situation if there's an immediate danger. Okay. The 988 Suicide and Crisis Lifeline. This is a national one. Domestic violence support, and then we have some community crisis services like the Florida Mobile Response Team, the local crisis stabilization units like CSUs, and the community mental health. And then we also have one for the veterans. Now we're gonna do an activity. You can't really see it too much here, so I'll read off the activity. So it's a scenario. A 32-year-old male client arrives at a crisis counseling center after recently losing his job and separating from his partner. During the session, he appears angry, withdrawn, and emotionally overwhelmed. He states, "I honestly don't see the point anymore. Sometimes I think everyone would be better off if I disappeared. And lately, I've been so angry at my ex that I keep imagining confronting them." The client reports increased alcohol use over the past month, difficulty sleeping, feelings of hopelessness, social isolation, access to firearm at home. When asked further, the client admits he has thought about ending it. He has imagined hurting his ex during arguments. He denies having a current plan to harm himself or others. He states he just wants the pain to stop. And then some questions here that I have. So let's talk about suicide assessment with this scenario. What suicide warning signs are present? What suicide risk factors are present? And what additional assessment questions would you ask? Would you consider this low, moderate, or high suicide risk? Now, let's talk about the warning signs. So warning signs, and let's go back up to the scenario. This client, this client appears withdrawn. He's emotionally overwhelmed. He lost his job. He's separated from his partner. And he's using alcohol to cope. He's having difficulty sleeping and feelings of hopelessness and social isolation. And of course, he's saying things like, "I just want to end it," or "I don't see the point anymore." So those are some warning signs. And a lot of those can also be risk factors. So for example, he has means, or he has lethal weapons and he has access to them. Substance use is also a big risk factor here. Just losing a relationship and a job at the same time is also a risk factor. Let me go back to the other one. So additional assessment questions. What would you ask, audience? What other questions would you ask this client? And would you consider this a low or moderate or severe or high risk? Well, for this situation, we would consider it moderate, and I will let you know after we go over the homicidal ideations. So, homicidal warning signs are present. Are there any identifiable risk factors for violence? Would duty to warn or protect need to be considered at this point? Why or why not? Well, again, some of the warning signs for the homicide ideation would be his losing his job, and of course just the things that he's saying, the fact that he, what did it say, that he is so angry with his ex and he keeps imagining confronting them. That is a warning sign. He has imagined hurting his ex. That's also a warning sign. He has difficulty sleeping, social isolation. And so what are some big risk factors in this situation? He has access to weapons. And he is substance abuse. He's using alcohol. And just like suicidality, he also is emotionally overwhelmed and he's lost his job and his relationship. Now, I would consider this a moderate case. I wouldn't say it's severe simply because he has not carried out the intent, and he is actively talking about the situation on hand. And he says, I just want the pain to stop. So this leads me to believe that it is a moderate case. However, because he's not carried out the plan for homicide or suicide, this does not mean that we need to take it lightly. This means that we still have to ensure that we are assessing further, asking further questions, and that we are taking the necessary measures by placing that client into a crisis unit or seeking therapy, and definitely implementing that safety plan and providing resources to that client. And here are all my references. All right, so I hope that you enjoyed my presentation. I hope that it was informative as well, and that we all take it as serious as we should going into our counseling roles. And yes, toodaloo.